founding documents of the modern state of Israel, and to celebrate its centenary, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come to London, where he's been in talks with Theresa May. To some, he is the arch defender of the Jewish people. To others, he's a bellicose hardliner dedicated to expanding the very settlements seen by the Palestinian Arabs as their obstacle to peace. And he joins me now. Welcome, Prime Minister.
The good part was shorter than the bad part.
Well, let me turn to the bad part, if it's the bad part. The second bit of the Balfour Declaration, which does say that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Can you really say that that has been held to by your government?
They talk about the civil and religious rights. In fact, Israel's Arab citizens are the only ones in the Middle East, the only Arabs in the Middle East who enjoy genuine civic and religious rights. Religious freedom is protected in Israel as nowhere else, tragically, in the Middle East. And civil rights, of course, they're in Supreme Court judge who is an Arab, ministers, including in my government, who are Arabs, Druze, and members of parliament who are Arabs, and so on. I would like to see more involvement of the Arabs in civil life.
In Israel and in the occupied territories, there are pretty gross human rights abuses. Human Rights Watch, let me read you this. Whether it's a child imprisoned by a military court or shot unjustifiably, or a house demolished for lack of an elusive permit, or checkpoints where only settlers are allowed to pass, few Palestinians have escaped serious rights abuses during the 50-year occupation. And again, Amnesty International say much the same thing. Israeli forces unlawfully killed Palestinian civilians, including children, in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, and detained thousands of Palestinians who opposed Israel's continuing military occupation, holding hundreds in administrative detention. Torture and other ill treatment of detainees remained rife and committed with impunity. That is not in the spirit of the Balfour Declaration.
I completely dispute the arguments about torture, and I completely dispute the tendentious statement here, because no democracy has been threatened like Israel, with enemies that seek our destruction, have fired thousands of missiles on us. Just imagine thousands and thousands of missiles on London. Actually, you don't have to imagine it. You had it. Look at what was done in retribution. We haven't done that. We act, I think, in moral ways. I think our army, which is there's no more moral army in the world, is maligned. And I think part of the battle of Israel, the battle that I'm involved with, is to dispel these lies, and I have no compunction in doing so. I think Israel stands out as a beacon of democracy, a beacon of self-restraint in a sea of troubles, in the attacks, the wanton, violent attacks that are meant to destroy us. And that, I think, should serve as an example to others around us, because the others in the region do not do this.
All right. If there is one thing that upsets supporters of Israel, including many Jewish community leaders in this country, it's the push of settlements. Now, your own defense minister has said that the rate of settlements in very sensitive areas like East Jerusalem and the West Bank is faster than at any time since 2009. You're pushing ahead, and this is the one thing that makes supporters of Israel despair, including in this government.
I think that the settlements are an issue. I don't think they're the issue. I think the issue is the 100-year-old persistent refusal of the Palestinian leadership to recognize a Jewish state in any boundary. If that were removed, all these issues, including the issue of settlements, would be resolved. I do take issue with one other thing, since I can
take issue away. Yeah.
Well, see, I think the idea that Jews cannot live in Judea is crazy. I mean,
but this is, at the moment, this is Palestinian territory,
well,
and you're putting...
It's disputed territory.
The UN says it's a flagrant violation of international law.
The UN also says that the UNESCO, vaunted organization, just said that the Jewish people have no connection to Jerusalem. Tell that to King Solomon and King David, 3,000 years of Jewish attachment. So I think the facts are different, but I think the central fact is this. I think settlements is a side issue. Because the idea...
Not to the Palestinians, it's not.
Well, I think it is too, because when we removed all the settlements from Gaza, and ostensibly did what they say, Andrew, go back to the 67 lines, take away the settlements, which we did. Gaza didn't become peaceful. Gaza launched thousands of rockets from Gaza that we vacated against Israel. Not against Tel Aviv, against Jerusalem, against every part of Israel. And when I asked them, and I said, why are you doing this? Rhetorically. Is it to liberate the West Bank, where the other part of the Palestinian people live? And they said, yeah, that too, but no, we want to liberate Palestine, Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Akko.
So you're in a war with Hamas. They have now done a deal with Fatah. Right. Do you distinguish between Fatah and Hamas in this regard?
Yes, I do, because Hamas takes its goal of destroying Israel and translates it into active terror. That is not the case with the Palestinian Authority, and one would hope that Hamas would move to that position and not have the Palestinian Authority move to Hamas. So I would say this: unity for peace is good. Unity for the destruction of Israel is bad. Okay. And that's what we're looking at right now.
What is also clear, however, is that your policy for Gaza is not working. The policy of having a kind of cordon around Gaza, restricting what can come in and out, a kind of blockade of Gaza, has actually increased the power of Hamas in Gaza and mobilized the population behind Gaza because of the appalling human rights situation inside Gaza. This policy is simply not working.
Gaza is occupied by Hamas. Hamas is 30,000 armed thugs. It's a thugocracy, armed thugocracy, in which they periodically execute Gazans, Palestinians. They don't cut off their heads, but they pretty much do the same. Mass executioners who put an AK-47 bullet right in the back of the neck of anyone who tries to relieve the people of Gaza from this. Here's what we've done. Here's what I've done. I have
shot a lot of people there too.
I have opened up the border crossings to enable 1,000 trucks a day of goods, food, medicine, anything you want. Just unlimited supplies coming into Gaza, as long as they're not weapons. And in fact, it's Israel right now. If I had to say, there's one country, Israel, more than any others, that is actually taking care of the population of Gaza, because we have no quarrel with the population. We do have a quarrel with those who hijacked them and used the territory of Gaza to launch a war against Israel. One day I hope we'll be rid of Hamas. Hamas will disarm. Then we could have a glorious future.
Well, let's look at the future, because you've described the issue of the Palestinian state very vividly recently. You've said, actually, you know, what we can't have is an armed, hostile, anti-Israeli state sitting on our borders forever. We just cannot have that. And therefore, you've used the word an entity, a Palestinian entity. Are you suggesting that what the Palestinians might get is, as it were, the status of a kind of self-governing territory inside a greater Israel?
I think they should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten us, which means that it has to be the security.
Fall short of a full state, in other words.
Well, I'd say the reality in the Middle East, which is peppered with failed states and pre-failed states and collapsing states, means that if we withdraw our security control from an area, what happens invariably is that militant Islam comes in, whether Daesh, ISIS, or Hamas, backed by Iran. Either one is horrible. Horrible not only for us, horrible also for the Palestinians or the Lebanese. You just heard Hariri, the prime minister of Lebanon. Resigning. He said basically Hezbollah took over, which means Iran took over. And I think this is a wake-up call for everyone. It says what the Middle East is really experiencing. It's experiencing the attempt of Iran to conquer the Middle East, to dominate it and subjugate it. And I think when Israelis and Arabs, and it's all the Arabs and the Israelis, agree on one thing, people should pay attention. We should stop this Iranian takeover. And I
want to come to Iran directly in a moment, but just before I do, it sounds, if you talk to almost any British MP, they say, two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution. The way you're talking, it sounds as if the two-state solution is more or less over, and we're moving to a different solution, a one-state solution.
No, I don't want a one-state solution, I'll be clear about that. But I'll say, and I'm unabashed about saying that, but I want to make sure that what we have next to it is something that will not threaten our lives. It really makes a difference what the other state is.
Sure.
Is it Costa Rica or is it North Korea? Is it another mini Iran or is it Luxembourg? So nobody says that. When you say two states, the other state, if it's not demilitarized, if it doesn't recognize the state of Israel, which the Palestinians still refuse to do, then it merely becomes a platform for continuing the war against the one Jewish state. And therefore, I think you have to be more specific and say, no, what we want is the recognition, finally, after 100 years after Balfour Declaration, finally recognize the Jewish state. I wanted expletive deleted. It's about time. Recognize the Jewish state, and let's make sure that that the Palestinians do not have the weapons to destroy it.
And you've been talking about all of this with Donald Trump, a man who's got a slightly dodgy rep in this country, but you've seen him up close and personal. What do you make of him?
I think he has, first of all, I think he has leadership qualities, and I think he wants to, he sees in the Middle East something different. There are some people who saw Iran as the solution to the problems of the Middle East.
Some people like Barack Obama, you mean?
Some people. I had, by the way, a very good relationship with Barack Obama when we did agree on things. So we signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to give Israel a 10-year security package. I welcome that and I respect that. But I disagreed with him on Iran because I think, yes, I think he saw Iran as a solution in many ways, and Donald Trump sees Iran as the problem. But it's not Donald Trump who sees Iran as the problem. We do. The Arab states do.
There is a
Hariri, who just resigned, does as well.
There is a new,
and he's right.
There is a new and unexpected alliance, if I can say that, between Israel and many of the Sunni states in the region against Iran. Listening to you talk about Iran, it's almost as if you see them as one of those great empires moving in, the Assyrians or whoever, moving from Asia right the way to the Mediterranean. And you have said very clearly, putting aside even the nuclear issue, we will stop them doing that. We will not let them get to the Mediterranean. We will not let them have an Iranian Shiite empire spreading from Tehran right to the shores of the Mediterranean. How are you going to stop them doing that?
Iran openly calls for our destruction. Something even in your experience, you may have been under the threat of conquest, but not destruction. But Iran openly says we're out to destroy what they call us the small Satan, en route to the big Satan, the great Satan, the United States, and in the middle is
middle-sized Satan.
Middle-sized, no offense, you were a middle-sized
No
Satan.
offense taken.
But this is what Iran wants to do, and it is seeking to colonize Syria for that purpose. That is to Lebanonize Syria. What they did in Lebanon, that Hariri, Prime Minister Hariri, resigned over, is basically took over the country. Probably killed his father, threatened to kill him. So the same thing is being done in Syria.
The collapse of so-called ISIS, or the Islamic State.
Well, as ISIS collapses, as ISIS moves out, Iran moves in. But they want to bring their Air Force there, right next to Israel. They want to bring Shiite and Iranian divisions right next to Israel. They want to bring submarines and military vessels right into the Mediterranean, right next to Israel. So we will not let that happen. We will resist it. And I think
you would go to war to stop that happening.
You know, the more we're prepared to stop it, the less likely we'll have to resort to much greater things. There's a principle I very much adhere to, and that is nip bad things at the bud.
But if you can't, I mean, we've had rocket attacks on Riyadh in the last few days. We've had what's happened in Lebanon. Things are moving all over the place. Things are moving in the Horn of Africa. You can see this is a big, big situation. Are we drifting or moving at this stage towards a major war in the region between Iran and her allies and proxies on the one hand, and Israel and the Sunni states on the other?
You're definitely in such a conflict, and you're quite right. There is a realignment in the region. But I think it's a larger battle. It's the battle between medievalism and modernity. The forces who stand for modernity, Israel squarely does, have to fight these, have to resist the onslaught of this militant Islamism that uses rockets, terrorism, suicide bombers, and so on. And the sparks of that firmament you see on the streets of London. If medievalism wins there, you lose here. So we're really on the front line of this great battle for the future of the world, not merely the future of the Middle East, but the future of the world.
And you think Donald Trump gets it and is at your back?
I think he definitely understands that Iran is the primary problem. It probably accounts for 95% of the problems we experience now in the Middle East. And I think he gets it, and it's a good thing that he gets it.
Can I ask about the condition of Jews in this country? Because there are I've got a lot of Jewish friends, and there are a lot of Jewish community leaders who are very worried about your government, and they say that particularly the settlements issue has made it much, much harder to defend Israel in this country. We've always had anti-Semitism in Britain, but it's been quite quiet for a long time, and it is back on the rise.
Well, I wouldn't blame Jews for anti-Semitism any more than I would blame blacks for racial hatred toward them or anti-gay hatred because of what they are, not what they do.
Distinction between Jews and policies.
Well, you know what happened? Theresa May gave this extraordinary speech, on the Balfour Centennial, and she said, you cannot go and attack and say that Britain has no right to exist because you oppose some of British government's policies. So Britain has a right to exist, Israel has a right to exist. You may disagree with this or that policy, but you would never question any other country's right to exist based on this or that disagreement with a policy. Yet this is what is leveled against Israel and against Israel alone.
One of the big supporters of Palestinian rights in this country is the new leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who has said in the past, for instance, that we shouldn't allow free access for who he calls Israel's criminal politicians to come into this country. He might very well be Britain's Prime Minister before long. What would that do to relationships? And should you not pick up the phone and talk to him directly?
Well, first of all, the British people decide who they want to govern them. But I hope that there'll be a continuity of British policy with Israel, because here's something people don't know. That cooperation has saved many lives. Many Israeli lives, many British lives, because we have an intense cooperation between our security and intelligence agencies, and it is protecting Britain and it is protecting Israel. And it's something I hope will continue in the future.